Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. And today we have a brand new friend, and I always love it when we have brand new friends. This gentleman is a writer, a director, a producer, a performer, and he actually comes a little bit from horror film royalty. And I can't wait to learn about his background and how he got here, and also talk a bit about his current film, which is premiering on the 20th, I believe, at a festival right here in New York. I'm in New York at the moment. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Charles D. Lincoln. Hello, Charles. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I'm fantastic as well. So I'm so glad that Jose introduced the two of us. And I've been spending like the last few days just like looking at your work and learning about you. You have such a fantastic and interesting background, and you do like a little of everything.
Well, I guess because I get bored easily, but I grew up with this like real healthy respect for film and everything. I also love doing music. I saw Ozzy Osbourne and Metallica when I was 11 years old, and that like put me on, changed my life, just put me on this path to being really creative and being in like poverty most of my life. But it was yeah, exactly. So that's who I blame for but it was, I had such amazing adventures because of that, but I always kind of wanted to do film, because like I said, I grew up with a father who, he would, he'd make me makes it sound like I complained, but it was more of like, we'd watch a movie and we'd watch the credits afterwards because he wanted to emphasize to me that everyone on the film was just as important as the people we saw. And then he would also get me these old magazines and stuff on how they did special effects and like science fiction and horror and all this sort of stuff. So I kind of grew up, always seeing behind the curtain of film and being interested in it. But, it was also like, I also didn't want to really feed my dad's ego. So I spent most of my life in music until I went deaf in one ear, not through music, by the way. That was actually more a condition I was born with that I didn't know I had until... Yeah, it was one of those things that like...
Because I totally, just as I was like really like kind of researching you and learning about your background, I assumed that it was the music, and it's like, oh, okay, well, this is what I get for hanging out at the bitter end all night. So I guess I'll move into writing.
Yeah, no, it was a condition called Meniere's disease, which is just, it's something you're born with and it doesn't show up till you're in your 30s. And it looks like other things. So a lot of people have it and don't know they have. So if anyone out there is getting what they think are constant ear infections, while they're also getting migraines and vertigo, they might want to actually go and get checked for that. Yeah, because it looks like a whole bunch of different things until you actually, very quickly before we get to the fun stuff, I remember thinking I had an ear infection and I was going to go my ear drained. And they kind of like tapped me on the shoulder and like, there's no fluid in your ear. That was like, uh-oh. That's that's not good. So I was kind of always interested in that, and then one day when I had been kind of disillusioned with music, which happens every now and then when you do something for like 12, 14 years. My friend Kibby from the band The X Possibles and Reagan Youth and Gas, she invited me to be part of her music video. So, as like a weird, pirate at a satanic ritual or something like that. And
as one does.
Yeah, just typical stuff, just that's just my life. But so I went in there and I did it, and I was like, oh, this is all sorts of fun. I should probably start getting paid to do this. And I then went into looking into getting into film, and here I am 10 years later.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I want to go back. I want to talk. So
sure.
So let's go back to the beginning. You were
Mhm.
born, and then what happened? So you were born.
Then my parents did a lot of drugs and had orgies, and I was dropped off my grandmother's. So that's, I mean, if you want to go back really far, that's kind of what happened.
Well,
Um,
I do know. I do know. You talk about being born in Hell's Kitchen, but being
yeah,
raised in on Long Island. So he's like this
yeah,
kind of dichotomy. And
yeah.
I know a bit about your father. I don't know much about your mother, but your father is like a horror legend.
Fred J. Lincoln, yeah,
Yes, yeah, Fred J. Lincoln. So
yeah.
so just talk to me just as a kid growing up, because you're like one of like the what they would consider like a Hollywood kid, even though you didn't grow up in Hollywood. But at the same time, I imagine you always had talent, and you always talent around, you always had creatives around. Talk to me just about just what it was like before you were old
Well,
enough to really say, I want to do this. Just
well,
yeah.
the funny thing about all that is that I was a very like angsty kid. So I remember distinctly when right after high school, I moved in with my dad, and he had moved to LA at that point. And he had this party, and it was all like members of Motley Crue were there, and NFL people, and Pam Anderson before she was famous, and all the and porn people, and all this sort of thing. And I had so little interest in any of them. I sat in the living room reading Queen of the Damned and directing them to the bathroom whenever they'd pop into the house, because I didn't
So
care.
like
Like,
you didn't care about it, like you didn't care
no,
about the whole like show busy thing, or you
yeah,
didn't
not
care
at
about like
all,
what were
not
you
at
into
all.
at the time,
Even
like in high
even
school, what was your
I was
focus?
oh, in high school, I was being my focus being a delinquent. I was a really bad student. I was basically, because I hated Long Island so incredibly much. Yeah, I mean, I was in bands, but none of those bands ever went anywhere in high school, because I'm when I get into something, I get crazy obsessive with it, and which I think is kind of the key to being successful in any art, is you kind of have to go to that weird level with it. But a lot of people are just like, oh, it's a kind of cool way to have parties in the weekend and everything. And I was more of like, we have to practice 12 hours a day and all this other crap, and that, so it never really worked until I was way out of high school, and then I found other people who were similarly obsessed with it. Music was pretty much what kind of I had a lot of anger as a teenager and stuff, and it really helped me, music, because it was able to give me an outlet to be able to to scream and throw things, and just generally
Totally.
be, because musicians are they have no social graces, and it's pretty much like being around like drunken Vikings all the time. And
It's so
really,
funny how
yeah,
true that is. Like when you
yeah,
think about actors, you think about the Tony Awards and the
oh
Oscars,
yeah,
and everyone shows up in their gowns and in their
oh yeah,
tuxedos. And then you go to like the Grammys or the American,
oh yeah, yeah. It's
and it's
funny
like
that
a free for all.
Yeah, it's funny. The first film I produced, Teresa and Allison, the director Jeremiah Kipp, I'll never forget him once saying that I was the craziest person he had ever met in his life. And me in my head thinking, I'm toning it down and being a responsible adult around you, man. Like, you've only met me at like a 4. You've not seen what I'm like when I'm a 12, and I'm like, like, oh man, it was so funny, because like that's one of the things I noticed upon coming to the transition between film and music was hilarious, because as I said, as a musician, you go through life just literally doing whatever you want, and when you get to a certain level, like no one says no to anything you want to ever do, so you become just this giant friggin' toddler. Like I remember like I met a playwright who unfortunately passed away, but he did pass away angry at me, so I guess in a way it is fortunate. But me and him met. We spoke about a bunch of stuff, and he had wanted to put me in one of his plays, until he had mentioned something to me about paying the tab. I didn't know what a tab was, because I had never had to pay for alcohol before. So I just kind of agreed to whatever I thought he was saying. And then at the end of the night, he was like, so are you going to pay the tab? And I'm like, what? So he got very angry at me for that, because I didn't know you're supposed to pay for drinks.
Well, that's kind of shady, though. It's like, yeah, I'll cast you in my movie if you buy me
Yeah,
drinks. So he's supposed to be,
yeah.
wooing you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. I'm like, oh, he's taking me places. He's gonna pay for the drinks, and I don't know what a tab is. So I had to learn that, and I had to learn how to be like it's a lot of times I feel like I'm in like My Fair Lady or something, where I'm like trying very hard to be a responsible adult person when like I'm really bordering on being feral sometimes.
But you don't
Um,
have the accent, right? Like Eliza Doolittle had the Cockney accent. You don't have the Long Island accent. Like the
I
rain in Spain and mainly on
Yeah, no, I actually really refined my accent growing up because I didn't move to Long Island until I was about 4. So I had that like old school New York City accent. And then that got kind of tempered by the Long Island Italian accent. So growing up, I spoke more like this. But as I discovered, you can't really have business meetings with people when you talk like that because they 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 feel, number one, people either think you're dumb or they think that you're going to whack them. So it's the thing, like it's one of the things.
Although,
Yeah.
depending on who you're sitting across. Like,
Well, oh no, it comes out when I'm angry. When I'm angry, it's like you're talking Joe Pesci. So it comes out very strongly then. And every now and then I'll get to do film roles for other people where they're like, yeah, speak with the accent. I'm okay, fine. There you go. But it's what's really funny about it is that there's certain words as hard as I've tried to give myself this kind of neutral accent. There's certain words I can't say without
such
it,
as
like pajamas. I can't say
pajamas.
pajamas. I can't say, I don't know, pajamas. I don't know how one would even pronounce that without. Like I know people say like car, but it still comes out like caw for
Uh-huh.
me. So it's the accent's there. It's just buried under my attempt to be professional.
Yeah.
It's as I said, people hear that accent and they think, oh God, this guy's gonna like it's funny story, by the way. My father, he worked in horror films for a while, and then when he was in Last House on the Left, which was Wes Craven's first film,
Mm-hmm.
and afterwards he got all these offers, and that movie was, I think it was made on like a $250,000 budget or something like that, and then made in 1972 $3 million, which is insane.
Totally.
Yeah, for this low budget, horrible movie where my dad's a rapist and murderer in it, to make that much money is nuts. And so he got all these offers for horror films, but my father at the time thought, well, I've done my horror film now. It's time for me to be a leading man. And he never quite did become Al Pacino as he thought he was going to, but he became a legend of the porn industry because of that. And so that's what he spent like the last like 30 years of his life before he kind of acknowledged Last House on the Left and started doing the horror conventions. And in fact, he when he did Chiller Theater, I remember him telling me that it made him realize what his life would have been if he had stayed in horror and not gone on to film. I mean, not gone on to porn.
Right.
But I remember being on set when I was 18. I worked for my dad when I moved to LA briefly. And I say briefly because I hate LA. I know this is in Vegas and people are listening, in the West Coast, but I don't like Los Angeles. I hate it. But anyway,
it's its own vibe. It's its own vibe.
Yeah. Like my sister lives out there, and and I, hey, if someone wants me to work out in LA, I'll work out there, and I will leave the moment the job is done. But so, I went out there and I worked, we're in the Simi Valley somewhere. And I told a joke on set. I worked as a grip, which for those, people hear porn and grip, they think it's something dirty, but it's actually an electrician. Like I worked as an electrician for a few months, on a couple of porn films. And so working as a grip, one of the other grips is this guy named Carlos. And the first time he ever worked on a porn film. And I don't remember what I said. It was some joke or other, but he said that I was funny. And of course, I was in a mood, as I often was. And a mischievous mood. I wasn't like a bad one. I said to him, how am I funny? And I went into the whole Goodfellas routine of like, I'm a clown, like I'm here to amuse you and all that sort of thing. But Carlos had never seen Goodfellas. So
Never?
He had never seen Goodfellas, so Carlos thought I was legitimately freaking out on him. And, and what was great is the rest of the crew started seeing what was happening, and I guess they started laughing because they knew I was doing the Goodfellas scene. And Carlos is just trying really hard to diffuse the situation while I'm just quoting all of Joe Pesci's lines and everything. And at a certain point, everyone in the crew was laughing, and I just had to break out. I'm like, dude, you've never seen Goodfellas? He's like, no, God. Should I? So
it's like, yeah, everyone else has.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone just burst into even more laughter when he said that. So that was, but it was one of the things with the accent. So, it's like, well, how am I funny? Like I'm a clown? Like I'm here to amuse you?
Well, you know what I think it is? I think it's I remember, so I mentor a young director from LA who now is finishing up film school in New York. And I remember him saying, like, he was out somewhere and he heard someone like legitimately do kind of like I'm walking here type of a thing. And I remember he called me, he was like, wait, that's like real? Like people really talk like that? And so he probably was like so confused because he's like, wait, it's like
Well, what I love, by the way, about, I don't know if you know about that I'm Walking Here was an improv, because I guess they didn't have a PA to tell people not to start their cars, because he legit yelled that as a driver while he was doing the scene. So that's as real New York as you can get, is him trying to do a scene and the guy almost running him over. Hey, I'm walking here, so. It's
I love that. Well, what was that like now we're in this place where like everybody, their mother, their sister, their son, their daughter has an OnlyFans. Yeah. What was it like, being young back then, having a father in porn? Was it cool? Was it embarrassing?
It was to me it was just like having a dad, who was into anything else. Like when I was 18, I remember him trying to hook me up with a very actually attractive woman who was a porn star, but I was not interested, and not because she was in porn, but because it was one of my dad's friends.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like I've had people like, say like, hey, you turned down a porn star. I'm like, yeah, but imagine if your dad, like, what does your dad do? He's like works in an office. Like, imagine if your dad tries to fix you up with his secretary.
With Cheryl in accounting.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, like I wasn't comfortable with that. And it had nothing to do with her doing porn. It had to do with her being my dad's coworker.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
Yeah, so that's kind of how it was for me, is that I was never ashamed of it, but it was just like a regular job for me. It was like as if my dad had been a plumber or whatever.
Right.
Like, what really stood out to me about my dad was just the kind of adventures he had and the connections he made, most of which I refused to utilize growing up, because I never wanted to get into like the Nepo baby thing, which is what, everybody calls it now. But
why not? Like, to me, like I would have like killed for my parent to like have some kind of.
A lot of people say that to me. A lot of people say that to me, but I don't know. I've just always been like determined to prove myself, and
I guess the grass is always greener, right? Like you know what you know, and you want to do it your way. I get that.
Yeah, and it's well, I was going to say, it's one of the things when we did my first horror convention with the film Teresa and Allison, which is a vampire film that I wrote and produced, and I'm one of the antagonists in. One of the things I loved about it was, I went there, and to everyone it was like, oh shit, it's Weasel from Last House on the Left's kid, before the movie actually screened, and then after it screened, it was, oh, that's Charles D. Lincoln, and I loved that.
Yeah,
how like I went and
it gave it. You had your own identity. You weren't like attached to someone else.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always been kind of my thing. Like, I remember my dad, when one of not the Woodstock where Limp Bizkit fans burned everything down, but the Woodstock before it, I didn't go to it. And my dad was like, oh, you should have let me know. I would have called Trent Reznor and gotten you on. And I'm like, I don't want you to call Trent Reznor. That's just how, or like.
Nobody ever.
Yeah, well, that was me. I was totally. I live in New York, and I've lived in LA, and I've been around famous people my whole life, and it's never been a big deal to me. The only people who are ever a big deal, which is hilarious to me, were always like, guys from some random obscure band that only 5 people had ever heard of. And then it would be like, oh my God, I'm meeting Steve Zing from Samhain, and everyone would be like, who? But for me, that was a big deal. Otherwise it would be like, oh, look, there's Danny Glover. Hey, Danny, how's it going? And then move on. It was,
Totally.
like my dad made Vince Neil have a conversation with me at a party once, and I felt so bad for Vince Neil because I'm like, he's here to get laid and
Okay, wait a second. Jose, that is the quote of the episode. My dad made Vince Neil talk to me.
Yeah, like, and that was the thing. It was just like, Vince Neil doesn't want to talk to me. He wants to go and get laid. Don't make Vince Neil talk to your son. He's only talking to me because I'm your kid. Like, don't do that to him.
So you talked about, you said a little earlier, you said, like you had a lot of rage
yes.
as a teenager and when you were in school. So where did that come from? So like as a writer, I write and produce TV and film. And one thing I learned a long time ago, just in terms of character development, they always say like 7 to 9 is like it. Like whatever happened to you when you were like 7 or 9, that kind of is the turning point. Much of your life and much of how you deal with the world and much of how you come to the world and much of how you try to protect yourself in the world comes from something that happened around that time in your development. What do you think it was? And maybe you haven't really given a lot of thought to it. Or maybe you're a New Yorker, maybe you've had a lot of therapy and you've given a lot of thought to it. But like, what was it that kind of like instigated kind of that rage that, once you were a teenager, music was kind of the only outlet for that?
I don't know. Like, I never really minded my parents being divorced when I was a kid. I hated Long Island. I knew that. I hated the suburbs, but I still went out to the city like every weekend. I don't really know very much.
Were you pissed to be in the suburbs? Like I know.
I hated it. I absolutely hated it.
I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and from my bedroom, like I didn't live in the city. Like I had always lived in the suburb, but it was like one of the suburbs on the edge of Chicago. And from my bedroom window, all as a kid, I could see the Chicago skyline. And I remember always thinking, like, why am I not there? Why am I here? Why am I not there? So is there like I always wonder, like, especially like people who like say grow up in Manhattan or like, born and like raised for like their early childhood in Manhattan and then get shipped off to someplace really, really far, like Zanzibar or, New Hyde Park. Like, is there like kind of like oh my God, how could you people do this to me? Why am I not walking down 8th Avenue right now?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of that, there was that. I also think, growing up a mixed race kid in a really white neighborhood and dealing with racism real early, there was a lot of it in Long Island. A lot of those sort of things. I mean, it was boring. There was very little to do. You needed a car to get places. And I've never really been much. I don't like driving, which is the thing that came up later in life, but I don't like it. It's not a thing I enjoy. The only part of driving I like is being the passenger and being in control of the radio. But otherwise, I don't like driving. I don't like quiet. I love the sounds of the city at night. The sirens and the horns and all that sort of stuff. Like that to me is what I love, and I love concrete and grime and all those sort of things that I grew up with. Like I grew up like as a little kid, I know all these people who were like terrified of New York and growing up and stuff. And for me, it was this just wonderful place where I remember like we went to see a movie in Times Square, not a porn movie, but like, obviously like, I think it might've even been the first Star Trek actually, which I remember being bored out of my skull by that. My dad like just knew everybody. He would walk down the street and like all the pimps and hookers and drug dealers would be like, yo, Fred, what's up? To me, like I remember the pimp, like a guy with the coat and everything.
With
like,
the hat and the feather and the
being like, yo, give me
platform shoes.
Yeah, being like, give me some skin, little man, and me clapping him 5 and stuff. And that was how I grew up, like real New York, Manhattan, growing up in Hell's Kitchen, and then the contrast of, oh, now I'm in a place with like lawns where everyone complains and they, the police get called on you if you're out past 11, And
Yeah. Was that
and
weird? Because
yeah.
your father was known, right? And even though horror is a niche, like people knew, like what was that like growing up in suburbia with your father? Because I'm sure
Well,
people knew who your father.
I grew up with my grandmother. My dad was off in Manhattan,
Oh
and
no, but I mean, like, I'm
yeah.
sure, like, people in the community knew who your father was, or maybe had seen his movies, or like, was there ever any like, was some people like, oh my god, cool, he's an actor's kid, or was there like, oh my god, he's the son of kind of like a weird artsy guy who lives in the city? Like,
Yeah.
was there ever any of that kind of?
If there was, it was never directed at me, and I didn't really know about it much because
Mhm.
I never really. My dad does movie. I never was that type of kid.
Right.
I was never like into telling. Like I've never been like hell. I referred to my parents as Faith and Fred because I
Sounds
didn't
like a
like.
sitcom.
Yeah, because I didn't like the idea of giving honorifics to anybody.
Hmm.
So I've always been, first grade. I was the first day of first grade. They started doing a review of the stuff we learned in kindergarten. I got up and said, "I already know this. I'm going home." And so, call me when you're teaching stuff I don't know. So I've always just been, this is why, as I said, music was good because I don't know where the hell else you put someone, with that attitude as a kid. Um, Unless it has bars on the windows. So that was the thing is I never had respect for authority figures. I never liked to be told what to do, and I
But
never
like in
really.
a way that was
Yeah.
like disruptive or violent, or just more like, oh, he's stupid, just don't pay attention to him.
It
Like
wasn't
that.
just it wasn't disruptive or violent until I was a teenager.
Okay.
That's yeah, when I was a teenager, and then it's because people think that they can stand in your way, and it's like, oh, you're gonna try to stop me, And so, as I said, I was such a bad kid. It was really funny how like engaged I was in subjects like, and this goes to what I do now, in subjects like creative writing and English and literature and stuff like that. Those were the things that I stopped being, the little troublemaking monster, and I would pay attention. And I remember having a whole discussion with a teacher about the Divine Comedy. Everyone in the class was just like, wait, what? Like, how does he know any of this? And, like they were talking about, like, it was good for the advanced literature, medieval literature class or something. And me going on about, oh, will we be reading the entire Divine Comedy or just Inferno? And people are like, wait, whoa, wait a minute, what? How did he know this? Which was another thing that one thing I have to definitely give credit to my grandfather for, and it also once again helped me become the creative person I am now. Is I used to see my grandfather reading books all the time.
Hmm.
And as a kid, a little kid, I hated reading because they would always assign us just the most boring, awful stuff that I always felt insulted my intelligence. And
Hmm.
anytime I felt I was insulted or anyone was talking down to me, I would always react negatively. And I used to see my grandfather reading for hours and hours, and I would be like, why is he doing that? Like, reading is so boring. But maybe one day it occurred to me, maybe it's what he's reading that's good. One day I thought, well, let me try reading one of the books he reads. And so I read my first novel, which was Stephen King's Pet Sematary.
Okay.
And it changed my entire perception on literature, on writing, on being creative. And it once again became an outlet for me. I think that's really the thing is when you have people who are angry or violent or anyway out of control, there are positive
You give them a
outlets for
book
it.
about murder.
Yeah, like there are positive outlets for it, and it's a key of finding what that is, whether that be when I discovered like metal, when I discovered horror novels, when movies. That's the sort of thing is that like you can find ways for people to have a positive outlet without them lashing out in the wrong ways. It's just a matter of finding what it is that they're going to connect with.
Right. What was it about Pet Cemetery that really pulled you in?
It was just the story. It was just I never, for me, it was like a movie but longer, and it was, the story of it, as I said, like just was really, it was really wonderful. It's not my favorite Stephen King book, but it was my first Stephen King book. And after that, I started reading as many of his books as I could. And then from there, I heard him call Clive Barker the future of horror. So I started reading, not the Telltale Heart, that's Edgar Allan Poe. I started reading The Hellbound Heart and Great and Secret Show. And so Clive Barker became my favorite author. And it just kind of snowballed into me reading all these other people because of having having really loved Pet Sematary. So it really opened my mind to a lot of what you could do through literature, and of the worlds that you could create and the worlds that you could kind of just express,
Yeah.
And it's and it's one of the other things. I also think I was also kind of angry about stuff because growing up with my father, doing when him being involved in the porn industry, that meant that you had the Mies Commission on Pornography constantly harassing everybody. So I grew up, my mail being, not my mail, my family, no one sending me letters, but my family's mail being opened and our phones being tapped by the FBI and all those things. And that made me very political. And I've discovered the more political you get, the angrier you get, because like you tend to see, like I was talking to someone a couple of years back about how, I thought I had matured past being this angry person. And then I discovered, no, it wasn't, because Donald Trump came into office and it just made me, everything that happened in the world would just make me furious all the time. And I was just like, oh, I guess we just didn't have an orange dictator in office. So I guess I hadn't matured. The world just got better briefly. And that was the thing. Like, I grew up in that, like, kind of very oppressive, Reagan Bush years and stuff. And so that was, I think a lot of that contributed to me just being this very, very angry young man. And, but it's also one of the things that contributes to my art. It's one of
I was gonna ask you that, like, because you talked about like feeling so connected to the story of Pet Sematary. Is that how you like approach your art? Like when you were doing music, I'm saying, well, we're gonna talk about just your. I mean, you've written books and you've written films and all that, but like, is that kind of how you come to art? Like in terms of like telling a story or telling a tale or wanting to communicate something or an idea? Or...
Usually, what happens with me when I write is I will have a scene in my head. Pretty much every single story I've ever written starts with one scene, and it's only ever once been the first scene. Like the movie that I'm promoting right now, that's coming out October 20th, Bishop's Cove, at the Shaka Go-Go Fest and at the Film Noir Cinema in Manhattan. I'm sorry, in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. It started the scene. The first scene that popped into my head, I think, is about 45 minutes into the film.
Okay.
But I wrote that, and then the rest of how we got to that situation, because that's kind of what I do is I'll write a scene, I'll write something that I feel is interesting, something that says something, or something, a situation that popped into my head that would be like, wouldn't that be interesting, funny, horrible, any of those adjectives, and that's what it usually starts. It could be gee, wouldn't it be funny if this happened? Or, oh man, imagine if this happened. Or, and that's how I start writing. And all of my stuff tends to be pretty political, but it's all in, pretty much, it's subtext, like, my first film, Teresa and Allison, it's a very extreme, very messed up vampire film, but it's a film about class inequality. Each one of the vampires in it represents different, types of people with wealth and privilege, and and then how they kind of exploit poor people. But if I'm going to make a movie about class inequality, no one would like. Well, okay, not no one, but like 10 political science majors from like NYU would watch it. But if you make a movie with, blood and boobs and vampires and all this crazy stuff in there, and then hopefully maybe someone gets the subtext of it as they're watching it, that's kind of different. Like, I'll say that about Teresa and Allison now. I won't say what Bishop's Cove is about, other to say it's about people doing the wrong thing for the right reasons.
Right. So let's talk about Bishop's Cove. So this is your first time directing, yes?
Yes.
Okay,
my
so
first
how
time
did
directing a feature. Yeah.
Okay, a feat. All right, right, because you've done everything. You've done shorts. You used to host a thing for on public access in Manhattan. You've done all this. So how did this come about?
This came about basically because for years I've had one scene in my head. And it's a scene where someone wakes up in a room. It's very sparse and it's very dark, and they wake up and the whole floor is covered in broken glass.
Okay.
And that was just an image that came into my head, and I've kind of, I had it for years and years and didn't do anything with it. And then when I started writing, it became very quickly a script. I think it only took me a few months to finish the whole script.
Okay.
Which is, I've had stuff that it took me years to write, and then I've had stuff that it took me 7 weeks to write. But it took me a couple months, and it was very, the themes of it and what kind of put it together were very, very, it just came together very easily for me. It was a story of this woman named Heather, and she has a wonderful life. But one day she's approached by this man, and Heather is played by Emily McKinley Hill, who is just brilliant and been in some way or the other, she's been in everything I've ever directed. So she was in my first short film. She's been on 21st Century Demon Hunter, which was the web series I had that got onto Amazon, and it's somewhere now, and it's on DVD and Blu-ray. And so Heather, is visited by this man who tells her that someone she knew about 20 years ago has passed away, and that her parents want you to deliver the ashes. And so it was a way for me to kind of talk about number one, the early 2000s, kind of the punk culture, in the Village and stuff that I was a part of to an extent. And also talk about some of the things that happened during it, some of the good things, some of the bad things. Because one of the things about Bishop's Cove is I wanted it to be, if I'm making a horror film, number one, I want it to say something, but I also want to kind of, I want people to feel uneasy when they watch it. I don't want to just make hey, if someone wants to pay me to do it, I'll make, some sort of just disposable, hey, it's a fun thing you watch for an hour and a half and you eat popcorn and you kind of jump a couple times and that's fine. But what I want to make is things that kind of linger in people's heads and make them think, and where they kind of may not come out of the theater feeling, all happy. They might, but they'll come out of the theater being like, whoa.
Right.
What about,
it's an experience,
and
it's something that they chew on and meditate on and think about long after they've left that experience.
Yeah, because the best films for me are always films that stick with me in some way, where they make me think about something, or where they, where there's just something that I'm blown away by. I mean, like my favorite films, there's stuff like Full Metal Jacket or Ichi the Killer or Natural Born Killers, or any of those sort of films. And then even like the horror films that I liked growing up, like I grew up watching stuff like The Omen and The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, and and then Return of the Living Dead, and just all these
things that are disturbing. Like like things that kind of chill you to an extent that even when you're watching it, you're like, oh, okay. And then like a day or two later, you kind of you're like, whoa, that kind of has stuck with me, and I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's and it's not to say that I don't like things that are just popcorn fare, because I will tell you, one of my weird guilty pleasures is the Final Destination films, because I love those. I would kill to write a Final Destination script. But they're not exactly high cinema, but So it's not like everything has to be, and it's in fact, John Waters, who did, and I love the Chucky movies. Oh my God. I absolutely love the Child's Play stuff, and I love the
Are
series.
you watching Chucky now?
Oh yeah, I love the series. I love it, and I love
What do
how
you
this.
think? What did you think of how the new season that just started? What do you think of how they've started the whole
Um,
new?
it's a very interesting place for Chucky to be. I'll say that. But I love that the show acknowledges all of the insanity that has been the Child's Play canon. Like how I love that they brought in Glenn or Glenda and didn't just ignore, didn't ignore that those characters existed. I loved that they, had Tiffany there and I forget what Brad Dourif's daughter's character's name is, but without legs, I love that they brought all these characters in there and celebrate just how absolutely insane the canon of Child's Play is. But one of the reasons why I brought that up is because I was thinking of John Waters, because John Waters said that he loved art films, but he also loved exploitation films, and he considered them an equal influence. Mm-hmm. And I really love that, because I do. I love a trashy, I love trashy movies too, but I also love movies that say something. And my challenge for myself as a filmmaker is to make things that are messed up, that are, that people come out like, whoa, I don't know what to say about that, but also that are intelligent, that make you think, that can be funny, have heart, like you can make something where people care, like that was the one thing my complaint about 80s slashers so much is, you have these disposable characters that, no one watches Texas Chainsaw Massacre looking for Franklin to get away. Like they're not like, boy, I certainly hope that person gets out of there. No, you want the guy with the chainsaw to kill everybody. That's what people watch those movies for, because they don't give you characters that you really care about. So my whole thought was, what if they did? Mm-hmm. If you're trying to, it goes to a movie as to what the goal is, what you want out of it is. Because if you're just trying to make people like cheer the crazy parts, then okay, you can have disposable characters. But if you're trying to terrify people and trying to make people, that's making them feel too. If you want them to be like, oh my God, so give them characters they care about. Give them people that have heart. Give them characters that was one of the things. I know so many people hate Halloween Kills. I know so many people. By the way, I will right now. I'm defending Halloween Kills. I will not defend Halloween Ends. No, there is no defense for that film. But Halloween Kills, one of the things I loved about that movie was I didn't want any of the people who Michael kills to die, except for one guy who's but if you watch the movie, pretty much what I'm talking about.
Thing. To me, that's what good writing is. Like, I think that it's about everybody, even if the person's a douchebag, it's like, but I can understand his point of view. Like if I were born in that era, in that environment, in that, I can understand why that's this character's point of view and why he or she or they are behaving that way.
Exactly.
And
exactly. And that's one of the things I loved about that movie was there were so many times where I was like, oh man, I don't want to see them kill that person. And that's exactly how you should feel about it. Murder is not a good thing. There's so many movies where we're like, yeah, get her, and I've always been the impression that, like, we should kind of be treating murder as something horrible. And so let's show it as something horrible. And that's kind of how I approach my films is, like I come from a very, as I said, I came from a very angry past. I've been in a lot of fights in my life, and violence should not. It's one of my problems with how a lot of films are. Is I think violence is celebrated too much in films, and I feel that, like, violence to me is a failure, and violence to me is something that should be treated as a bad thing. And
because it's like the final, right? It's the final. It's like, clearly you don't have the vocabulary to get what you need to be done. You don't have the strategy to get what you need to be done. So the only thing you can do is hit someone in the face.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
that's kind of the thing is like I hate the kind of celebration of like, yeah, it's gonna be cool for this guy to go in there and shoot 900 people. Like I kind of hate that. So violence, and there's a lot of violence in my films, and it's always meant to be ugly because
Yeah.
real life violence is something that I've been around too much of it in my life, and I really feel that it should be treated as something that you shouldn't be cheering.
Yeah.
So that in my films I always kind of feel, in fact there's my very 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 first short film, I never released it and no one will ever see it because I felt that the violence in it was too celebratory when I watched it.
Oh wow. When you
Yeah,
watched it like immediately, or was it like it's you sat on it and then watched it and was like, whoa, what was I thinking?
no, it was more of me trying to edit it,
Hmm.
and no matter how I edited it, it always just felt kind of celebratory.
Yeah.
And so I was like, nah, that's not the message that I ever want to get across. I eventually used it in something that's going to be coming out early next year. Um, as but I what I did was I basically had made it the home movie of a serial killer. So it kind of works that it's like, well, now that's why it's celebratory because it's this lunatic who, one of the characters watches something on his television, and that's one of the video that he has in there. Um,
Yeah.
but then there and within the context it works. But I did not want to put out something that I felt was putting a message out there that I didn't want to be spreading to people.
Right.
You
No,
know.
totally understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Not to even like move away from your current film, but have you started working on your next piece, or right now are you just like totally focused on
Uh,
getting?
no, there's something coming up. I can't really say what it is, but there's something we're working on. We're making announcements soon.
Oh, that's
Um,
exciting.
yeah, we're working on stuff. I have the next thing will be very different in tone. It'll
Hmm.
still say something, but it's a weirder film. I'll say that. It's weirder. It's a little more over the top. So it's a little more fun. Even if it does have my typical, nihilistic bleakness at parts, but it's a lot more fun in concept of a film, and I'm very excited for what we're gonna do with the next one. But right
Yay.
right now we're kind of emphasizing Bishop's Cove, and then we'll be able to move forward and announce that pretty soon. I'll just say I'll be working with a lot of the actors that I worked with before. I
Okay.
there's people that I love working with, and I think that's kind of one of the great things about working in film is you kind of create these little families on set, and
Yeah.
there's a period of depression that happens when a long it's weird because like a lot of things, like a regular job, you're like, oh great, we're done with this, this, I don't know.
Project or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, I know so little about real jobs that I'm like, because I worked retail, but I was not a good worker. I was basically random when I worked
We're
retail.
done with inventory.
Yeah. Yeah, when I worked in retail, I was basically Randall from Clerks. It was basically just my attempt to be snarky with the general public is what I would do as I'd be like, I remember distinctly, I don't remember what they said, but I remember someone said something that bothered me and then asked for help. I'm like, no, I'm not helping you till you apologize. And that's
And
you
thus
know,
ended your retail career.
yeah, that was pretty much me in retail. I was never meant for those sort of jobs. So
Oh
um
my God. I love
yeah.
it. Oh my God, dude, Charles, I could talk to you for hours, but
Well, thank you. Thank you.
not unfortunately, because I guess it is fortunate because we have sponsors, but
Mhm.
we're kind of at the end of our hour.
Oh man,
So,
but yeah,
but you have to come back again, and I
I
have
would
to
love
come. I'm
to.
gonna come. I'm gonna come. I'm in New York at the moment, so I want to come and see. I want to come to the festival and see your movie.
Awesome.
I think
Awesome.
it's gonna be so wonderful. Where can we find you, our audience? Where can they find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they keep up with what you have
Uh
going on and the progress of Bishop's Cove?
sure, they can find me at charles.d.lincoln on Instagram. And Bishop's Cove is Bishop's Bishop's underscore Cove on Instagram as well.
Awesome.
Then there's also Facebook, which is just Bishop's Cove, one word. And you can find it there. The festival is the Shaka Go-Go Festival at the Film Noir Cinema in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. It goes from the 18th to the 22nd, but Bishop's Cove will be screening at 11:30 p.m. on Friday, October 20th. You can buy individual tickets for the film or a day pass for the whole festival, or you can get the whole, enchilada of all 5 days. But yeah, look that up. And our trailer, we put the QR code in there because we're from the future. So if you just look up on YouTube Bishop's Cove Shaka Go-Go Festival trailer, and the QR code's on there. It'll take you right to the Eventbrite ticket purchase.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Charles C. Lincoln, for joining us, and I can't wait to see Bishop's Cove.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And you're more than welcome to come back anytime.
Thank you.
I can't wait to meet you in person on the 20th. Thank you, Jose, for introducing me to Charles. And thank you all in Radioland for joining us for another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Hassel and Friends right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. And we'll chat with you next week. Bye. Hi there, it's Jordan Van Haslo. Yes, that Jordan Van Haslo. I don't know if you know this, but everyone's favorite radio show and podcast is now available on Spotify. That's right. Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends, my weekly one-on-one chat with some of the most interesting people I know in entertainment and the arts, can now be streamed on Spotify. I share real estate with Joe Rogan.